Hey guys, RJ here, and what I have here is some video footage from a portion of a talk, a presentation I did in Copenhagen, Denmark, this past summer. And the reason I wanted to show you this footage is it brings up a topic that I've long been thinking about, which is how do we get in our own way, and how do we get out of our own way? The notion that guys come into this area of life with a clean slate and we don't have a lot of unconscious patterning that gets in our way, and that all you have to do is give guys a different way of thinking about women and a new set of things to do and they'll have a lot of success. That strikes me, after teaching for so long, as being empirically false. So many times I've seen guys over and over again, the same people come to a seminar, they have all my material memorized, and yet at the same time they don't make consistent progress. So in this clip that I'm going to show you, I discuss this idea of what is it that gets in our own way. And as a teacher, what I've learned to do is to think systematically, to think in terms of interacting systems, not in terms of one piece of behavior that needs to be changed. That can be useful. Let's say a guy comes to me and he has a phobia of meeting women, a real phobia. I can do an NLP technique and change that, and often that's all that's needed. But oftentimes, far more often, there are some systems going on, not just a small piece of behavior, but major systems going on. And if you look in terms of systems, which I'll explain a little bit further, then you can make tremendous leverage. You can get tremendous leverage into people's experience and begin to create real deep level change. So I want to pick this clip up at the end of a story. I was telling a story in this clip about a guy who used my stuff, and after years of fear with women, used my stuff, made out with the hottest girl in the bar, got her phone number, and when he got home he couldn't find the phone number. He waited 3 days to call her and he couldn't find it. And he searched through the dumpster for 90 minutes and came up with nothing, with his hands empty. And he called me up and said, I've been depressed for 6 weeks. I can't even talk to a woman. And then he said something interesting. He said, my old self came back. So I want to pick up the clip as I discuss this and get a little bit more into it, because I think you'll find the value in it as we go forward. So let's just continue with the clip.
He calls me on the phone. He says, Ross, tells me the story. He says, I've been depressed for 6 weeks. This is what he said. I couldn't make up my stories. They couldn't possibly be weirder or funnier than what people actually do and tell me. So he said, I've been depressed for 6 weeks. I can't even talk to a girl. Then he said, my old
Excuse
back.
me a minute.
Now, as someone
My
who's
old
been
self's
trained in neurolinguistics and been doing it since 1987, I listen when people tell me that kind of thing. Whenever someone volunteers some kind of information that refers to some deep unconscious process that they do, you should pay attention, because they're giving.
Now, that point pertains to whether you're doing change work and healing work or whether you're doing seduction. People will volunteer either because sometimes they just bring it up spontaneously, and other times because of the themes you introduce and the questions you ask. Women will sometimes volunteer things that should raise your ears. You should go, wait, this is useful. For example, if a woman says, you know, the other day I just got bored and that part of me that loves to daydream took over. Whoa. Now when people talk about parts taking over, they're describing a fundamentally hypnotic process. That means that there's an aspect of their consciousness that's been walled off or compartmentalized or put away that normally isn't present, but somehow is taking over. Now that's a major hypnotic phenomena, and when you hear people talking about that, either in the context of doing change work or in the context of seduction, don't just gloss over it. You want to pay attention to that, and you want to begin to get further into it. So one of the things you'll also notice is the same techniques I use to assist people in changing themselves rely on the kind of mindset, the same mindset that I use for seduction. This is part of becoming curious about people. I'm going to do a couple of modules on becoming curious about people. Because I believe that getting curious about people is a way to create deep rapport and deep comfort, and also get them to open up and offer you a lot of useful information.
You a lot of leverage. They're giving you something really powerful that you can use.
Notice that little gesture, something really powerful you can use. I'm leaning on it.
So none of my students here caught that. So I have a question for you guys and girls. I want women to participate too. I invite you to do so. Where was his old self when he was making out with that girl and super confident? Where was his old self?
The question here is, he said his old self came back. So my question to the audience is, well, when he was doing really well and making out with that girl and had all the right awarenesses and making all the right moves, where was his old self then? Where was it?
Malmo? Stockholm? Where was it? Somebody, yes. No, because if his old self was there, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So somebody else. Where was his old self? Huh? Okay, there is no self. How about who? Here's something else. Where did his new self go? If his old self came back, where did his new self go? New self world? I'm encouraging you to really think about this. You've probably heard people say, I don't know, I just wasn't myself. Or
the comment I have here, and this was not something I thought of during this presentation, is that the whole notion of a self is not useful because it turns processes into a thing. One of the ways that we can begin to change our orientation towards ourselves, there's not really a self, but towards what we experience and towards the world, is learning to see how language freezes our understanding. In reality, this guy didn't have a self, like there's a thing called a car, or a thing called a TV, or a thing called a coffee cup. In reality, we don't have selves. What we have are processes, ways of thinking, flows of thought, flows of feeling that take place at different levels of awareness and at different levels of consciousness. So if instead of a self, you think in terms of an accumulation, an intersecting of various different processes, various different ways of thinking, various different ways of assigning meanings to situations, then we sort of take the veil of mystery, no pun intended, we open up this black box, and instead of making it a thing called the self that's either there or not, we begin to see a flow of activity, an interacting flow of activity and flow of different mental processes. So, for example, his old, quote, self may indeed have consisted of self-talk, things like, I can't do this. It may have consisted of a set of feelings in the body, like anxiety or tightness. It may have consisted of a lot of out of his conscious awareness imagery in his mind of all the times he had ever failed. So there's a set of beliefs, a flow of feelings, a certain set of imagery that when they bind together and interact and clump together, create the illusion of something called an old self or a new self. And when we think in terms of a thing like a self, it blinds us from seeing all the various different pieces and processes that are going on. If you can see the various different processes, then you know where to make the intervention. I hope this isn't too intellectually complex, but it's actually very, very key insight into understanding speed seduction, both in terms of the language tools we use with women, knowing what to notice with women, and the tools for self-change. Not that there is a self. You understand what I mean?
it just doesn't feel like it's me. I don't know how you would say this in Danish, but you get my point, yes? So, then I started to ask a different question. Bragging about my experience, but I'm also telling you the truth, having done hypnosis for 23 years, I thought, okay, what does he have to do in order to maintain that depression and that sense of hopelessness? What must he be ignoring in his mind?
So in addition to asking myself what must he be doing in his mind, I begin to ask, what must he not be doing? What must he be ignoring? What must he be walling out of his conscious awareness? What must he be disowning and disassociated from?
In order to stay that depressed, he had to ignore everything he did right. He had to totally hypnotically hallucinate away all of success. Everything he did to prepare that night, everything he said, all the things he noticed, he had to hallucinate them away completely. And
now, not only did he have to forget all about them and wall them off and stop thinking about it, that act of walling them off and no longer thinking about everything he did right, no longer remembering all the preparation he did that worked, not only did he have to do that, but the choice to do that took place outside of his conscious awareness. I'm certain he didn't consciously say to himself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to forget about everything I did right that night. I'm going to forget about how I prepared my state. I'm going to forget about how I opened her properly. I'm going to forget about how I noticed when she was responding to me and how I skillfully took those responses and amped up her state. I'm going to forget about how in control I felt when I went for the kiss and how I escalated it with the right kind of touch. He didn't consciously make that decision, but nonetheless, that decision took place. Something in the way he was used to thinking about success or failure caused him to, outside of his conscious awareness, make the decision to forget about everything he did right. And this goes to the notion that much of what happens in our life happens outside of our conscious awareness. Not only was he not aware of the process, he wasn't even aware that he made the choice to do it. And this is part of the overall understanding that a lot of what rules our life is hypnotic. Not in the sense that someone is taking a stopwatch and waving it in front of your face or telling you you are getting sleepy, but hypnotic in the sense that it takes place as a stream of unconscious processes that are activated outside of our conscious awareness. This is part of the profound understanding of speed seduction. And you see, speed seduction is so much more than memorizing what to say, although memorizing what to say is important.
only narrowly focus in on the fact that he lost the phone number. Now, in hypnosis, we call this negative hallucination. I can actually see a few people here who make fantastic subjects. I won't do any overt hypnosis here tonight. But if I were to hypnotize someone and say, the only thing you're going to see is my hand, and you will not see anything else, a good subject would hallucinate away everything but what I told them to focus on. Look at you all focusing on that. Wow, that's pretty cool. So it occurred to me that he had to be doing something, some kind of very less than useful trance to maintain his failure identity. The answer to where is his old self is correct. There isn't really a self, but there are processes that people repeat over and over and over without being aware of it.
Now, here is the further understanding I would like to give you. If it's true, and I think I've demonstrated it, and you can do your own investigations further, that much of our sense of self is in reality just these processes that are taking place. And if it's true that many men come into this area of life, come into this learning with a lot of processes that are not serving them. And if it's true that those processes largely take place outside of the conscious awareness and they're not consciously chosen. They don't think, okay, I'm going to sit down and I am going to dwell on all the failures I ever had with women and how bad it feels. If it's true that that's taking place, then the larger understanding is much of human life is hypnotic. That is the real understanding of speed seduction, if we define one of the key understandings. And that the good news is this also includes how women access their feelings of lust, desire, connection, fantasy, and through bringing up the right topics, asking the right questions, showing up in the right way, we can bring those largely unconscious processes to the surface and link them to ourselves. That's the key understanding. I'm just going to go a little bit longer here because these get to be huge files.
What you repeat in your mind without being aware of it, that will either keep you stuck or let you try out new behaviors long enough to get the results you want. Does that make sense?
So if you have not been rehearsing a lot, if you don't give yourself the opportunity to go out into the world and practice frequently, one of the structures that's probably in place is you've been dwelling on mistakes. And by dwelling on mistakes, you've been rehearsing them. And because you've been rehearsing them, that's what your mind winds up doing. This is part of the process of getting in your own way. And the Nailing Your Inner Game program is a great way to untie this kind of stuff.
Some of you are not answering, so do I need to slow down?
And I also think you can see this goes a lot further and a lot deeper than having a thing called self-confidence or a thing called self-esteem. Instead, we look at processes that either get in our way or support us moving in a powerful new direction.
Down or translate it to Danish, or I'm serious. I need to know if you're following me, because this is kind of an advanced concept. Yes. Okay.
This is going to be a huge file, so we'll do a